Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, part 3. We're going deep into the night. We got the last section on geopolitics, and I wanted to give a quick recap. Now, again, if you're watching part 3, in part 2, we covered this week in macro and everything that was happening in the big, beautiful bill and the surveillance state and the war machine that is being built up in the big, beautiful bill and the stimulus and the impact and how you protect yourself. I also covered this week in Bitcoin. And everything that's been happening on the Bitcoin side, an exact breakdown of who owns the Bitcoin, what the network's looking like, the difference between custody and self-custody. In part 3, I'm going to be giving you an update on the next step of the proof of weapons network, looking at the major wars, what came next, what I've been forecasting previously, and how we know that those that have been watching Bitcoin Hard Talk, nothing that happened this week would be a surprise to you because we called it in the previous weeks as well. Now, we don't know the exact flavor of how it's going to happen, but by following the money, we don't listen to the media and we don't listen to the politicians, and we get a much, much better tool for seeing what comes next, which can give us less stress and we can focus on how to protect ourselves. Okay, now let me give you a little bit of a recap on the proof of weapons network, because basically the geopolitics as I see it today, if you're new to the channel, I'll give a quick recap, but you can watch previous episodes if you want to go deeper into it. But the proof of weapons network, which is a stateless entity that sits above government and is mainly in control of Western governments, UK, US, EU, and also Israel. And it has different factions like the military industrial complex, the financial industrial complex, the technology complex, the different areas of farmer and consumption and various other things. I believe that right now, the current geopolitical environment is that the proof of weapons network is negotiating a military industrial complex exit from the Middle East and using all of its leverage in order to utilize Israel that's about to be vassalized into the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC countries, because the military is going to exit and we're going to enter into a rebuild phase. And in the rebuild phase, it's leveraging the wars, the genocide, and everything it's been doing right now in order to accumulate as many assets as possible for the financial industrial complex, so that it can negotiate a strategic exit, a decolonization, because America's debt needs to focus on being a regional power because BRICS has fought against it. And in this process, the final disgusting, and by the way, if you haven't watched my style, when I put my humanitarian hat on, I'm as disgusted that the world works like this as you. But when I put my analysis hat on, I follow the money and I take a less emotional approach because I'm not giving commentary on what I would like to happen. What I would like to happen is very different to what I believe is happening by following the financial flows. So I think Netanyahu has got somewhat rogue, but he's trying to make himself as useful an asset to the military industrial complex, because the more damage the military does in its last exercise, the more negotiation for the financial industrial complex, and Netanyahu gets to prevent himself being dumped and ending up in prison or assassinated. And so Netanyahu is negotiating his exit right now because Israel as a brand, as a colony for creating the forever wars is no longer useful. And they've negotiated a more profitable model, which is investing in the region because it can harness nuclear energy, artificial intelligence and data center builds and various other things. And so we are going through that transition. And it only happened because China negotiated normalization between Iran and Saudi. The GCC and BRICS aligned against de-dollarization, and the America had to negotiate a strategic exit, which was manifested in the tariff policy, followed by the big beautiful bill as a stimulus as well, which we covered before. Now, obviously, out of this, although China did all the hard work and everyone in the region, and MBS and Saudi negotiated their decolonization by partnering and getting wealthy enough where they had the power to do that, and by being backed by BRICS and Iran joining BRICS and the various other factions, they've now given themselves enough power to be in this negotiation point and this changing time in history. And so Trump obviously wants to take credit for everything. And he was installed with the promise of you get the Nobel Peace Prize. So China continues to back and make BRICS more powerful, including adding its members like Iran and Western allies like UAE and Egypt. Egypt was vassalized through the IMF. UAE has bought its freedom through its own sovereign wealth, but it has managed the relationship between America and China by partnering and working with both. Egypt has been taking on less and less IMF debt and has joined various reconstruction projects with the China's Belt and Road Initiative. And so therefore, we have been in this struggle, and Iran has done a partnership where it is exporting record levels of oil to China, which is funding its ability to continue to resist. The resistance factions are holding back against Israel's colonial expansion, which is a colony of America, in order to utilize the profits of the military-industrial complex by creating those forever wars. But now the industry, by getting backed by BRICS, has entered into a new phase. So the GCC, headed up by Saudi Arabia, by UAE and Qatar, which is measured by the size of their sovereign wealth, have basically become a regional autonomy with some legacy issues. That there is Israel still being used as a US colony for the profits of the military-industrial complex, and it is trying to negotiate its exit so that it eventually can sit in the center of the world and have a very compelling future by balancing its Western interests and its Eastern powers, the falling empire with the rising empire, and make sure that it gets as much assets, foreign direct investment, and deals negotiated for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, who basically, if they invest in the region, are financially incentivized to not return it to a forever war. And this is the multipolar world order. And BlackRock has basically reset its portfolio to match this reality, which is why you're seeing a change in the structure of what its mutual funds are investing in, and a slow transition to this new reality. Because BlackRock is essentially the CEO as the largest asset manager for the Proof of Weapons Network, and the Proof of Weapons Network, through military deep state control, control over intelligence, essentially has completely vassalized the European Union, the UK, the United States, and is now vassalizing Israel by doing somewhat of a controlled demolition in order to hand over effective control in this partnership between the Western BlackRock Proof of Weapons Network, partnering and normalizing with the GCC, backed by BRICS, which is a competing power structure, which requires normalization with Iran, which requires the solution to the Palestinian colonial, violent, settler colonial expansive project once and for all. And so, but where are the profits going to be made up? Well, you do defense contracts with Saudi Arabia and those countries, which is what Trump was negotiating and why BlackRock and all of the Proof of Weapons Network pundits were there. You have Palantir contracts for surveillance and control. And rather than creating war, you essentially continue and escalate the hot war within Europe. And you make up the profits there by the ECB and the European Union perpetuating the narrative that they're defending democracy, so that the Europeans and the Brits can pretend that there's justification for why their governments are not spending any money on infrastructure and instead sending it all over to Zelensky, so that America can do a fake GDP print and support the Proof of Weapons Network, so that Americans think that their economy is prospering while they're losing more wealth through inflation. And eventually it's leading to the type of civil unrest that we're seeing that then ushers in the surveillance state that we covered in the macro section. Also, you need to push narratives so that China is about to reunify with Taiwan, so that you can spend more in Japan, in Taiwan, in Philippines, in South Korea. But at the same time, you get those military defense contracts, but they never escalate to actual military operations because the financial industrial complex is investing in this multipolar world order with BRICS and these regional powers rather than the global hegemon, so they can manage the portfolio. So I believe that we are witnessing the end and the final stages of the forever war, and the strategic tension that was created between Iran and Israel in the Middle East. And that's why I talked about the theatrics and the play-by-play of how everything was agreed and negotiated, I believe, through the regional powers in what was never going to be a war that was going to lead to World War III. And while I was on X Spaces, everyone was panicking, saying it's World War III, and I was just following the markets and saying, this is theater. Okay. Essentially, it was the end of what is called Operation Gladio. If you've read the book Operation Gladio by Peter Williams, where they create and fund, the West creates and funds terrorists and creates these groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda that they call stay-at-home militia armies. And then they create all these narratives in order to launder money through these drug trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking network through intelligence agencies that protect corporate interest, and you vassalize through lobby the governments and make people think that they've got a democracy. But people keep asking me, who are the Proof of Weapons Network? Now, a while ago, if you're a longer term listener, you'll know that in Bitcoin Hard Talk, I created a video. And what I want to do right now is play a video for you. What we're doing is we're playing around with artificial intelligence to make these longer form contents more consumable for those that don't necessarily have the time. So I went through one of my old videos where I described some of the key players in the Proof of Weapons Network. It's essentially a decentralized network measured by your monetary wealth, money and power. And when you make the wrong moves, you can be overthrown, assassinated, taken out by a blackmail ring, and then your wealth decreases, so you have less control and power over the network. And it's almost like a decentralized network that's not accountable to state because it controls state. And it has, the deep state in there as well. So it's lawless and control over certain aspects of judicial. But when you're not a part of the network anymore, i.e. like a mafia, just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. If you don't play the role, then the judicial can be weaponized to come against you, and lawfare can be used, and various other tactics. But the point is, it controls government. It sits layers. The government is only layer 3. Layer 2 is intelligence, and the Proof of Weapons Network, by controlling monetary flows, is layer 1. So what I want to do right now is play for you, and let me know in the comments section whether you like this format. It was very popular last week, but I'm just going to play a little bit of an AI summary that took my video on the Proof of Weapons Network, condensed it down, and articulated, a review on the Proof of Weapons Network. And then we're going to play that, and then I'm going to get back into everything that happened this week, and we're going to roll this final section out with an example of how you can control the process and a successful campaign. So Azad, now over to you. We're going to play the AI summary of the Proof of Weapons Network.
In Bitcoin, and a concept, something he calls the Proof of Weapons Network. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to dive into, well, a pretty powerful idea for understanding maybe why the world feels so chaotic sometimes, especially when you look at global finance. Our source today is Simon Dixon, a real pioneer in finance and Bitcoin, and a concept, something he calls the Proof of Weapons Network.
Yeah, Simon Dixon is fascinating. He has this knack for pulling together economics, tech, and geopolitics in a way few others do. And he's not just talking theory. He actually called the 2008 crisis. He co-founded Blink to the Future, which, backed huge names like Kraken, Coinbase.
Right, and he even advised El Salvador on their Bitcoin move.
President Bukele, yeah. So he's definitely been in the trenches trying to figure out what he calls the architecture of control.
Okay, so this Proof of Weapons Network, it sounds pretty intense. What does he actually mean by that? He says it's not some secret club, right?
Exactly, not a conspiracy theory like that. Dixon basically calls it a mafia-style debt-based Ponzi scheme. He traces it back to the Bank of England, like 1694, funding the British Empire. And he argues the U.S. Federal Reserve kind of took over that model later on. The core idea is that it thrives on concentrated wealth. It actually needs inequality to work.
Inequality is a feature, not a bug.
That's his argument, yeah. And its fuel, its drug, as he puts it, is debt, constant debt.
So if it's an operating system, not a, shadowy group pulling strings, who are the key players? Who makes up this network?
Well, he lays out a few key groups. Foundational are the central banks. Think the Fed, obviously, but coordinated through the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
Central banks for central banks?
Right. They're kind of the architects.
Yeah.
Then you have the huge asset managers. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. It's these guys. Through the sheer amount of assets they manage, they indirectly control, well, tons of shares and board seats globally. He mentions tools like BlackRock's Aladdin AI platform.
Oh, yeah, Aladdin. That gives them a massive view of the market, right?
A huge view and huge influence. But it's not just public markets. He also points to private equity and hedge funds.
The deep state firms, he calls them.
Yeah, like KKR, Blackstone. Their specialty, Dixon says, is coming in after a crisis, think reconstruction contracts, and buying up assets when they're dirt cheap. Then, of course, the global banks. JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citi, HSBC. Many are shareholders of the Fed itself. They create the complex financial products that, well, often get governments deeper in debt.
Okay, so banks, asset managers, private equity. What else?
Multinational corporations. Big tech, Google, Apple, Microsoft controlling the digital pipes. Big energy, ExxonMobil, Shell controlling resources. Dixon argues they aren't really loyal to any single country. They operate globally.
Stateless powers, almost.
Yeah.
And then you have individuals, old money and new.
Exactly. He mentions the billionaire families, like the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, who he argues were key in setting up central banking in the first place, and now they're joined by, the modern tech billionaires, Musk, Bezos, and others.
And who enforces all this?
That's where the intelligence agencies come in, according to Dixon. MI6, CIA, Mossad, he calls them the enforcers, using things like covert operations, regime changes, and psychological ops or psyops to kind of control wealth flows and resources behind the scenes.
Wow, okay. That's quite a network structure. So how does it actually work? What's the playbook?
The main engine, he says, is debt as a weapon. The whole system is like a Ponzi scheme because when banks create money by making loans, they create the principal, but not the money needed to pay the interest on that principal.
So there's never enough money to pay everything back.
Precisely. Which means you constantly need more debt, new loans, just to service the old debt. It's a treadmill. And this spills over into financial warfare, using financial tools like sanctions, economic pressure, currency manipulation, often structured through bodies like the IMF and the World Bank.
And they influence politics directly, too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Huge amounts of capital go into lobbying, funding campaigns. Dixon basically says they rent parliaments. Plus, setting policy agendas through groups like the World Economic Forum and enforcing financial rules via things like the Financial Action Task Force, FATF.
So against this backdrop, this proof of weapons system, which Dixon says requires control, violence, endless debt. He contrasts it with Bitcoin.
Right. He presents Bitcoin's proof of work as the alternative. Peaceful, decentralized. He actually calls Bitcoin a kind of speculative attack on the whole central banking model.
An exit from financial oppression, I think he says.
Yeah, it's a powerful framing.
So Dixon's point seems to be that understanding this network, this proof of weapons system, is step one if you want to reclaim some kind of personal sovereignty. What really stands out is this idea that the system isn't broken. It was built this way, on purpose.
Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the global financial system is structured like this, like a debt-based Ponzi scheme, how does that change how you think about stability, about security, the future of money?
And maybe the biggest question he leaves us with, how might something like Bitcoin, a decentralized alternative, actually shift that power balance? Definitely something to chew on.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that review. Let me know in the comments section what you think. And we're going to be doing more and more like this to try and, bring out more condensed ways of explaining things that might take me a little bit longer. So without further ado, let's jump in. Everything that happened this week. And as usual, the news flow is as big as ever. But it's getting more and more predictable, even though most people are seeing it as more and more uncertainty. So if you're a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk, you'll know that we were expecting the next stages, while we may not get the order right, but by following the money, the next stages is that we're going to enter into a ceasefire in Gaza, and then we're going to have some kind of Netanyahu exit and destabilization campaign as well. And I covered just before that video the types of things we were looking for. So what did we see this week? So there was meant to be on Monday the Netanyahu court case within Israel, where he is meant to be going down for corruption. And it's a solid case. If you've watched the documentary, The BB Files, you'll know that there is, all of the evidence that was leaked of all of his corruption and bribery and all the different stuff. So it's a solid case, which is why prior to October the 7th, he was coming after the judicial branch in order to make sure that the executive branch wasn't a democracy, and that was causing unrest within Israel and lots of protests. And then October the 7th happened. So he was meant to go to court on Monday, and that was delayed. And then immediately Trump came out and put a couple of tweets out there, because my personal belief, my opinion, is that in Netanyahu negotiating his exit, this war criminal, satanic demon that is just extending a genocide in order to have more power with the proof of weapons network and the military industrial complex, in order to make sure he doesn't go to prison or get hung or stoned or whatever his fate is for the crimes against humanity that he's committed, is obviously extending this in order to be more useful and negotiate his exit. And part of that, I believe that they said Trump needs to make you look good. And so Trump called out and did a couple of posts on Truth Social. One of them was saying, he's a hero. They're treating him so bad. How could they be doing any of this to him? And there was a couple of Truth Social posts along that line, essentially whitewashing the crimes against humanity that Netanyahu has committed, and even taking pressure on the MAGA base because Netanyahu is just so unpopular, even amongst the Israelis and the Americans as well. And so, that operation, I believe we will find out, is part of whatever the negotiated exit is for Netanyahu. Now, what else did we get? We had an initial announcement of a 60-day ceasefire, as I said and predicted, that would be significantly better than the Abraham Shield version, which was leaked by Israel. And I covered last week, which was like the worst type of thing. In a nutshell, I'm not going to go through it again, but the Abraham Shield was essentially like Abraham Accords 1 by Trump. It was sidestepping Iran and pretending there's no Palestinian state so that the whole region could unify against Iran, and the Greater Israel project could be funded by the military industrial complex. And then a rebuild happens once you vassalize Iran, and then you ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Because that is no longer feasible, the 30-day ceasefire reflected that we're going to be moving towards a significantly better solution than that. Now, no negotiation gives you exactly what you want. And if I were in charge, this isn't what I want, but I know we're moving directionally in the direction that I think we've been discussing. And so the ceasefire agreement was on significantly better terms. And there was a safeguard in there to move towards a permanent ceasefire. Now, we've seen all this before. We know that these can be tactics. Now, and if it wasn't for my geopolitical belief around what's happening here by following the money, I would be extremely skeptical and think this is a trick to get greater, into further genocide, ethnic cleansing. But I believe that all those efforts have failed, and therefore the GCC solution, because Egypt and Jordan didn't accept the IMF money, they wouldn't ethnically cleanse. Hamas continued to resist, and the Palestinians are still on the land. Iran engaged in the theater back and forth that was weakening Israel, taking out some of the hardliners in Iran, and having a theater for America to say they wiped out the nuclear program. And we covered that in great detail last week, so I'm not going to do it again. But essentially, the Abraham Shield was replaced with this coordinated strike from Israel to Iran and that theater. So we're no longer having the worst case scenario that I covered last week and the Abraham Shield or any of that type of thing. So what have we got this week coming up? Well, we got Netanyahu is due to visit the White House on Monday instead of going to his court case that was delayed by 1 week. I'm not sure what we're exactly going to get, but I'm expecting, if I speculate, announcements around a potential agreement, for the actual confirmation of the ceasefire. And it may happen right now, maybe within this weekend or now or by Monday. Hamas would most likely agree to the terms of the ceasefire. I am expecting that there may be hiccups, but I'm expecting this to move to the final solution. And I think there'll be all sorts of problems that will go along, but I'm not expecting this to be one of those destabilization campaigns like it was before. So I'm expecting the eventual, after this, during this campaign, or maybe even after it, some kind of civil unrest campaign within Israel, where essentially the same campaigns they used on the Middle East and that they started to use in UK and EU and now using in America will also be used within Israel, leading to some kind of regime change within Israel and the eventual fall of the cabinet. I'm then expecting a lifting of sanctions eventually within Syria and then within Iran as we get further and further down this negotiation, and then the vassalization of Israel into eventual announcement of some kind of Abraham Accords 2 with an actual Palestine solution, and a movement towards more vassalization of Israel into the GCC, the military-industrial complex exiting, and even potentially, at best, a one-state solution that returns Palestine to what it was before, which is equal rights for Jewish, Christians, Muslims, and a normal immigration policy before all the colonial, settler, and colonization, rape, stealing, massacring, and settler colonial Western project came in and started to cause all the atrocities that we are now over a century into as well. So I think the US, what did we see this week anyway? Well, there was confirmations that the US has been offering Iran very attractive things in order to engage in this process. Some of the things that they've been offering is lifting sanctions, as I said, releasing certain assets that were sanctioned, which is in the millions, I think about $36 million of assets. Those were slowly being released. Remember how Jordan Peterson framed it as Biden is paying $6 billion to Iran? No, that was the nuclear deal where the money that they had confiscated from Iran was slowly being released. I think they've been offering that same type of deal as well before Trump tore up the deal for the Greater Israel Project and the Military Industrial Complex Project. They've also been offering huge infrastructure incentives. Remember that I said the nuclear weapon thing is just the narrative for the media. It's actually about nuclear energy. After basically, so those have all been offered. These are leaking, and we've been having movements towards the directional thing that I think I've been sharing. Also this week, we had basically a secret session that was leaked between Netanyahu, the head of Mossad, and the Amman division. The Israeli court basically said that it is agreed to the prime minister's request not to hold its hearing this week, and that was based upon saying there's too much war going on, which is why we had the escalation towards Lebanon, and those escalations this week as well. The Pentagon announced that Iran's nuclear program has been destroyed, and they said that it has been delayed for 2 years, which provided the exact type of narrative that's needed in order to move to what I believe will be a 2-year denuclearization negotiation between Iran and Israel, because essentially I believe the military industrial complex that controls US's nuclear program is the same infrastructure that controls Israel's program. And I don't believe for a second that the Samson order was, put out there because they can actually put a nuke on America, as the intelligence and the leak said, because it is a colony for America rather than with a plausible deniability story. And this is America's genocide as well. And the Israeli army, the IDF, were radicalized and recruited for this Western interest project because it made so much money for military contractors. In fact, $10 trillion has been printed and handed over just in the proof of weapons network profits, stolen from the American people, handed over to the American corporations that have now built this global network that is not America first. So anyway, this 2-year delay really lays the foundation for such a structure. So you push out the narrative that Israel's trying to nuke America and Europe and it's got nukes filed at them. You release the JFK files that helps you realize, if you haven't watched my documentary that I put out there on NUMEC and why JFK was assassinated, it's on the blog of simondixon.com. I did an 8-minute overview of the AI version to make it easier for you. Please watch that as well. You can get that on my blog. But this is precisely what Iran needed to basically allow the IAEA, which is the Western-funded soft power structure that inspects nuclear countries that have nuclear weapons, which was inspecting Iran all along and said that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, which is what the CIA's intelligence and Tulsi Gabbard testified in Congress, that then we were moving towards the theater. They suddenly said, oh yeah, the IAEA said that they've got nuclear weapons, because they said that all of these inspections was Mossad deep state operations, and they've had inspections all along. So we know this whole thing is theater and bullshit narrative control. But now the Iran has pulled out for the first time of the IAEA inspections, which it was still doing even after Trump cancelled and tore up the nuclear deal. So 2 years from today, I believe that this is the perfect narrative for moving towards the denuclearization of Israel, which was part of what I believe the negotiation between the US decolonization project, because the GCC and BRICS created the resistance movement. So what else did we have come out? Iran's president, basically Pezeshkian, sorry if I'm saying it correctly, basically signed a law that approved in the Iranian parliament that suspended the cooperation with the IAEA. So that now means that we've no longer got those nuclear inspections, which paves the way for having the strategic, if this deal goes down at some time, you can then blame and go backwards. And if you're investing with the financial industrial complex in the stabilization of the Middle Eastern region, and you want to go back to the military industrial complex because something goes wrong as we enter into that, this is the perfect way of going back to that, because now the inspectors are leaving Iran. So as a result of this, we got a worse deal, which is how you know that this was, I think, a negotiated and agreed upon outcome as well. All agreed up front and in advance. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that I think Iran and Israel are friends. They're not. They're enemies. But this is how diplomacy works. And I don't believe they signed off on civilian casualties. This is just Israel doing what they do best, killing civilians. And things can go wrong, or you can have rogue elements because they do hate each other at the end of the day. So they do what they've always done, which is killing civilians. So, yeah, I believe that this is kind of a narrative that leads to Israel denuclearization as well, which I think will be a slow movement after we get the cabinet overthrow as well. The Iranian deputy foreign minister came out and said that Tehran received information from its intermediaries that the US does not plan any regime change in Iran. So I was saying I don't believe that Ayatollah Khamenei is going to be regime changed, but I do believe it was signed off on the hardliners that were agreed to be assassinated because they wouldn't agree with the general direction. And that there is no plan of action to assassinate the supreme leader. So that was leaked. And that was from the Iran side agreeing that their intelligence has confirmed that with the US intelligence. Also, the Iranian president came out and said, we are ready to start a new page in relations with the Gulf countries. So more confirmation that these different types of things are being leaked now that Iran is able to go back to its people and say, you know, we're resisting, we're coming from a place of power, but there is a new, regional vision that they pragmatically need to go into as well. The Iranian parliament passed a law that basically said that the use of Elon Musk Starlink is prohibited, which is the surveillance part of the US colonies that basically integrates with Palantir. And so that's not going to be allowed within Iran, which I believe was part of their negotiations as well. Trump signed up to an executive order to remove all sanctions on Syria. And so that was progressed. But the deal hasn't been announced yet because the final deal of the whole region hasn't been announced yet. Saudi Arabia basically came out and reiterated that it requires a two-state solution and a movement, real concrete steps towards Palestinian statehood before it will enter into any kind of normalization. Syria decided that it announced its puppet government, which I believe is for GCC, Turkey, and other regional interests. And any land that Israel conquers right now will be vassalized into GCC control in the end negotiation that it moves towards. Syria basically announced that it is linking its negotiations over the Golan Heights, which is the occupied territory that Israel said it was just going in temporarily, but now fully occupies. And I don't believe you will see any objection from Iran backing any type of resistance. They are now, I believe, on their own because this was the agreement from the Iran side. So Yemen decided that it would fire a ballistic missile on Israel, which was followed by drone attacks on Yemen from the Israeli side. Israel closed down its airspaces. And so I believe that Israel and US may be planning for some kind of attack on Yemen. And I don't expect that Iran will push back and they'll be autonomous in their decision-making process as we move towards this normalization. They've already said we won't stop firing at Israeli shipments until there is an acceptable solution to Hamas. And so Hamas needs to agree before there will be any pushback from the Yemen side. So whether that needs to escalate or not is dependent upon the agreement that is being put forth here. Trump came out and said that he'll be sending another 510 million in 2,000-pound bombs and guidance systems to Israel. So that's a little bit contradictory to what I think is happening here. Whether that actually happens or whether there's it wasn't in the big beautiful bill. So we'll follow the money and make sure we understand what happens, whether that's just posturing, moving into the negotiations, or whether that is actually going to happen would determine whether we think there's more escalation to de-escalate in this process. And at the same time, Iran is moving more and more towards autonomy based upon its BRICS membership. So immediately, Iran received, after the de-escalation, some 40 China-made I'm not a military person, so J-10C fighter jets that were equipped with AESA radars. And so China is supporting Iran's air defense as well. Also, PL-15 BVY missiles. China's showing that it's supporting Israel. Iran. So this again is based upon the power structure that Iran gets to be autonomous, based upon its BRICS membership. The GCC gets to negotiate. Iran stops the resistance because there's no need for resistance. The resistance normalizes into the new power structure. Israel vassalizes into the GCC, and BlackRock gets its negotiated exit of the military-industrial complex as the financial-industrial complex gets to play some of its game theory based upon the current negotiation. It also had some more modern aviation equipment. And so I think that really says that there may not be a return to the war between Iran and Israel. But if it does, I think it would be scripted based upon the new power structure. We also had an announcement from Syria that it will be exploring the import of gas from Israel. So this would be a kind of negotiation as well, because that would provide funding. And if it's once the vassalization agreement, just like it was for Egypt and Jordan, it had to buy gas from Israel. And so we'll follow some of these monetary flows as well. It was agreed to announce that Sheba farms are not Lebanese, but they are Syrian. So these were the disputed territory where Hezbollah was kind of a neutral zone between Israel and Lebanon. And so Syria agreed that it would classify Sheba farms not Lebanese, but Syrian. So this is another negotiation point as well that I think is being reset. What else did we get here? And so, whether we get some more escalations and anything that needs to happen with the Hezbollah side, my main point here is that I think that Iran will stand back in all of this because Iran is already moving to the negotiated solutions. Okay. Right. So that's all the things that happened this week. And as usual, I just want to make sure you understand how disgusting this is, putting back the humanitarian side as well. Just this morning, Israel forces, the IDF, through their program, killed 73 Palestinian civilians, and they've been doing an average of about 100 per day. 25% of them were just gunned down, and that was gunned down while they were visiting or trying to stand in line for their desperately needed food, based upon a quote-unquote American GHF, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has turned out to be Gaza Holocaust Foundation, an American operation that has been executed by the IDF and Israel in order to deliver just enough food but shoot down Palestinians as the negotiations are happening. Not only is Israel blockading Gaza, it is also weaponizing hunger, and it's been happening every single day. The Palestinians are being starved throughout this whole thing. They're losing more and more people. Even Harvard said they estimate 200,000 Palestinians have not made it. And at the same time, they're attempting to claim, the Palestinians are just basically attempting to claim their basic right for food, queuing up, and they're being massacred periodically so that many of them are too scared to actually come. If you don't think this is a genocide at this point, then I don't know what planet you've been living on. They're met with live fire every time they try and get food. According to field reports by Israeli IDF soldiers, there are basically under orders, as we know, the settler terrorists that are, they're weaponized by state-sponsored terrorism. And so in this, the IDF, they're told, they're under orders at the highest level, the top. These aren't rogue people, to just fire into the crowds as they gather, Palestinians that need aid, that are starving, at these strategic points, which are essentially massacre points. They're basically weaponizing food, and as they get to in these food lines, they're basically killing zones as well. This is how the proof of weapons network works. This is how dehumanized this network is. And if you studied the history, you know that this was, CIA level, based upon an Italian mafia, Nazis from World War II, integrated into the CIA when they combined with the Jewish mob that were managing the financial flows via the Vatican Bank in order to fund these black ops through human trafficking, weapons trafficking, and drug trafficking as well. So that's how this system works. But I don't want to end too depressed as well, because as I put the humanitarian hat on, I want to remind people that there is a resistance against this, and we are moving towards negotiations while they weaponize genocide. I'm hopeful that we enter into a much, much better outcome. And we're already starting to see the BBC journalists, 100 of them, already came out and said that they were forced to do PR for Israel. They're leaving their jobs, and they're, spreading the truth that the BBC's controlled, which is obviously USAID funded. This just makes an absolute mockery of Western journalism. It is Operation Mockingbird, where the CIA, the deep state, control the media in order to control people. Basically, it messages that all BBC has always been controlled media, just like Fox News, just like CNN. We know at the very top of these media structures, they're private companies that are controlled through these Operation Mockingbirds, and they're used to inflict power. And now we've got a resistance against that, which is social media and those algorithms. But, the legacy media and the BBC will always be remembered for their role in this genocide, and 100 of the journalists standing out against it. They know that every piece of media they put out, which is funded by these USAID budgets, has to get approval. And the deep state, Mossad, CIA, MI6 are controlling these different narratives. This was also used, as we covered in part 2, in the macro side, on the Ukraine side. So on Ukraine, we know that they want people to believe that they should join the army and fight for their country, even though Zelensky is just a conduit for the same military industrial complex and proof of weapons network that essentially has controls and vassalized EU, UK, US, and now turning on Israel to exit as well. And so what did we have from the other proof of weapons network? Well, Russia launches basically its largest drone swarm from the entire war onto Ukraine. So there was 500 plus drones and missiles And this was launched in a single day and a single night. That's a record. And we know that there's lots more money to be made by pretending that Ukrainians can fight back against this. So we're seeing that they're targeting energy fields, because we know who ends up with this: BlackRock, the vassalization of Ukraine in order to control land based upon pretending and making up for lost profits to get the ECB to print money, the Bank of England to print money, and then they can borrow it via these leveraged financial products and weapons of mass destruction through the IMF, UK government, and then they can use that to collateralize the land so that they can get the rare earth minerals and the resources that are needed, and the rebuild back better contracts exerted through Palantir surveillance, which is why they're destroying all these places in the first place. So Russia is basically targeting energy, taking down the energy so it can be rebuilt. They're taking down refineries, destroying infrastructure, airfields as well, logistics. And the US has now announced that this is an interesting one. It's halting shipments to Ukraine, citing concerns over whether the animation and air defense, basically, there's shortages within America, and basically for American forces and allies. Now, this could either be a fear campaign in order to get some of that big, beautiful bill budget, and think it would be. But also you can imagine there's elements of truth in this as well, because they need to ramp up their sales. They need more money to be printed. And that was everything we covered in the macro section as well. So that's everything that happened this week in the geopolitical side. Now, I want to end in something positive. Now, we take our small wins where we can, but by following the money, I would like you to know, once you understand how the proof of weapons network works, you know that the only way to control government is to be a part of the lobby. Join the proof of weapons network, which is essentially what the GCC countries, they've taken their sovereign wealth, they're doing partnership with the proof of weapons network to decolonize, buy their freedom, and high net worth investors can do that as well. So as you become more wealthy, you can contribute to lobby if you want to do that. And this is why what the crypto and Bitcoin community did in order to get the ability for people to self-custody. And the one good thing that did come out of the Trump administration is they did, because he wanted to get rich with Bitcoin, he allowed Americans to get rich with Bitcoin too. And so that is the one promise that actually got delivered. So you are getting more and more freedom to be able to free yourself with Bitcoin. But most people are falling for doing it with BlackRock and giving them more power as well. But anyway, once you understand how this system works, you understand that it is profit motives of this proof of weapons network that weaponizes ideology, and money equals power. And so the more money you have, the more power you have in the proof of weapons network. And they can turn on power by controlling how much money they have. And that is why boycotts are such a powerful thing. And you becoming conscious with your money and boycotting, ultimately using Bitcoin, beating the system, gaining more economic power in order to actually impact the system as well. So I want to give you an effective fight that actually happens against the proof of weapons network. Now, it's a small example, and I'd like to give more examples because it can be depressing, as I said. But this was a small victory. So a co-op Alianza, which is essentially Italy's biggest retail co-op, it axed all of its Israel goods. So they were only, basically they replaced all of the goods that this large co-op of retail in Italy. They said, we're not going to buy anything from Israel. And they replaced it with Gaza brands. Now, they had like a Gaza Cola and various other Palestinian brands. But basically they did that. They made that statement. And I believe personally, why this happened was not because this company suddenly had an epiphany and is watching the genocide and can't take anymore. It's because it wasn't for activism, it was for profit. And I want you to understand that we could judge people and say, well, you're only doing it to make more money. But it doesn't matter, because if that is how the system works, then we should reward that good behavior and make it more profitable to not support this genocide and not support the proof of weapons network, and exert our actual power, which is in reality, the government needs the lobby money. The lobby gets more money by corporations being more profit. They get more profit by us consuming their products. So in reality, if we pull together and control our money, we ultimately do have the power that we need over the real power, which is the corporate structure, rather than engaging in futile politics, which is why I think they want you believing that Labour, Conservative, Republican, Democrat actually makes a difference, because it only makes a difference if you're a lobbyist. And that means you need to get rich. So let's get the power structure right. And then let's not engage in futile activities. Let's engage in the real activities where we do have the power as well. And this is an example. So I looked into this co-op, and this co-op has the amount of Israeli products that they were actually gaining revenue from was 0.1% of their revenue. So it was insignificant whether they continued this or not. But they got free PR, and people started shopping at these servers because of this move. And so they gave up 0.1% of their revenue and got a massive PR boost, which was completely free. Now, when you look at the polls in Italy, 66% of Italians are anti-Israel, according to some of the surveys. So the majority are anti-Israel. Now, BlackRock has this ridiculous network that they use to control the corporations called ESG. And basically, the financial industrial complex, they offer more favorable rates for loans based upon your ESG score. And your ESG score basically rewards conflict-free companies. And so this could be updating, which is why I believe that BlackRock is not ideologically aligned. It is profit motivated, and it will dump Zionism in Israel slowly in order to increase profits. And that is the negotiated thing. So they will give ESG score to that, which will reduce the rates as well. And so it is more profitable. I believe that sat in their boardroom, they basically get to be more profitable by us expressing that this is the preference and us spending our money more ethically and in line with our beliefs. So they get to protect, their protest risk is gone, because the more protests that are happening, and I'm not talking about the ones that are infiltrated and turned into looting based upon, putting in, deep state campaigns, and they start shooting at people, pretend that they're waving a flag, and they infiltrate that. But anyway, the risk of protests goes away because they're aligned with what the protesters want. And their margins go up. They will make more money from this move. Now, do we need to care that they're only doing it to make money? I don't think so, because we need to play them at the game, which is things only move when money moves. And so basically just being neutral on Gaza is, the switching cost that is involved on not working with Israel and moving from those suppliers means that it's more profitable to not be neutral. And so now activists that were trying to essentially, I looked at the movements in the BDS, they were coming after this co-op for approximately 20 years, dating back to like the apartheid, the Palestinian Israel, early protests, and also the apartheid South African ones. But now they listen all of a sudden because they're sat in the boardroom and they're doing their profit and loss calculations. So if we can make it profitable to not for the proof of weapons network to engage in different trades, I think we can learn from what's happening in the Middle East as well. Because the market is, at the end of the day, what they factor in. And we saw with Starbucks that when Muslims in Malaysia were boycotting Starbucks, and it really impacted their bottom line because an executive was supporting illegal settlements, that had an impact on the share price of Starbucks, and that led to the overthrow of the board to one that wasn't supporting the settlements. So the moral of the story is, you may think that this is small relative to the genocide that is happening, but I think we should celebrate these victories, and we should recognize that they don't want you to know this. They really don't want you to know this, which is why they're coming after protesters. They're coming after BDS. They're making out like it's just some crazy leftist woke thing. And there's a lot of that going on. But I'm not a leftist. I'm not woke, and I use Bitcoin in order to build economic power. And that gave me the sovereign freedom because I can try and work with countries to utilize hard money to make their government smaller so we can take on the proof of weapons network. That's not leftist, wokeist. That is proactive. And that's the same thing that I think we can build an army of people proactively engaging in that. So I want you to use your money to get results, just as this campaign. The politicians don't work for you. They work for the corporate lobby. So unless you're going to join those corporate lobby, less time trying to influence that, because it's not going to make a difference. They'll listen to you, but they'll do what their lobbies say. But where does the lobby get their money? They get their lobby from profits from these corporations, and they need your money to pull together, particularly in some of these retail brands. So we change the world through our own money. And I put a tweet out there on X, a post out there on X in order to make people reflect that. This is what, remember, the genocide and the proof of weapons network is what backs the dollar. It's a global network of violence. It's a global network of debt. It's a military crony capitalist system that's epitomized in the big, beautiful bill. The dollar's not backed by gold. It's not backed by productivity. It's not backed by labor. It's not backed by any of these things, which is why the gold standard was removed in the first place in 1971. Covered this many times on Bitcoin Hard Talk. Why was it removed? Because they needed to keep funding the Vietnamese war. They needed to fire chemical weapons, and they ran out of money because everyone was asking for their gold back. So they removed the gold standard. They changed it to unlimited money printing backed by a debt-based Ponzi scheme that allowed the proof of weapons network to grow so large where you could print fake GDP by printing money and handing it over to these corporations through the proof of weapons network. So that in 1971, basically, they had to just completely cut the tie to sound money, and they replaced it with the printing press. And ever since then, that is what weaponized this network. In the 80s, BlackRock was created. They started investing in Aladdin and the artificial intelligence technology. But when in 2008, we had the Bitcoin white paper, for the first time, without storing gold and being incredibly wealthy, everybody was able to own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. They were able to boycott the Federal Reserve with Bitcoin to give less power to the proof of weapons network. They were able to opt out of inflation, opt out of debt slavery by beating every asset class and becoming more wealthy. And that is still the opportunity that exists today. I can't give financial advice, but sovereign power means that you are no longer subject to this centralized control and centralized power. You can choose a peaceful, decentralized monetary system for your savings, and you can opt out of the system and you get the ultimate benefit from that. Now, by not holding it in custody with BlackRock through their ETFs, and giving them more economic power to become the largest shareholder in all of the different proof of weapons network companies, and by holding your Bitcoin in self-custody instead, you get the benefit of that, and you get to boycott BlackRock as well. You basically don't let Wall Street profit from this new this mechanism that Bitcoin has created from digital hard sound money beating all asset classes, and you get to drain the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF by owning it in self-custody as well, to the extent that you can. As I said, I understand when you have some money locked up in some of these pension structures and various other things. But this is how you take back control, engaging in exercises that actually make a difference. And even if they don't make the biggest difference, they make the difference to you, as it did for me, as it did for many of us. So you can boycott the banks by not allowing them to profit from war, by essentially building your wealth and becoming debt-free, not borrowing against your Bitcoin, returning to the theological, Abrahamic, warning against usury and against interest, because this was all forecasted for us. But even then, if you own your own assets, you don't contribute. You boycott the banks that are fueling this proof of weapons network. Every loan, every interest payment, every single one feeds a system built upon conflict. Your money's been used against you in something that's not even aligned with your ideological beliefs. Now you can free yourself from the grip. You can boycott the global corporations by, basically where you can buy by spending in things that are more ideologically aligned with you. You can spend local from the farmer. I've started looking at all the labels, within our family, my wife, she started looking, the honey comes from, Yemen, and the dates come from, we started looking at what we saw, that there were some dates that came from Israel. And instead, does that support the Palestinians because it's in the West Bank? Or is there a structure on top? Should we be doing that? You ask the questions. Are we buying our eggs from the big the big supermarkets, or can we get it from our local farmers? And there's health benefits to that as well, because we don't get all of the stuff that's put in between. We get to ask the questions. So become more conscious with how you're spending your money, and collectively we can impact the businesses. And all of these businesses, the large global multinational institutions, we can't do everything. We have to understand, look, if I end up with a phone that I know contributes to stealing resources from Africa, that's based upon funding through Rwanda, that fuels M23 and ISIS and Al-Qaeda in order to steal weapons, I still can be more effective by having a phone that can use artificial intelligence. But maybe there is alternative routes we can go. We can't get it perfect, but we can become more conscious. And the more conscious we become in the practicality of the world today, we can sum up, am I more effective, even though I know I'm contributing to the proof of weapons network, but I'm able to get the message out to more people to combat the proof of weapons network. Think like businesses. They have profit and loss. They have balance sheets. They make these decisions. Start making your own collective balance sheet, your own profit and loss, and start thinking about the energy that money comes with. What boycotting can you do with that? We can stop this together by de-weaponizing altogether, collectively, the proof of weapons network. We can support real people based upon real values, not war-backed profits. And, we can back peaceful proof of work. We were given that gift. Now, of course, the warlords can use it too. But the more that is out of the system, the more decentralization, the more we can work, the more we can spend, the more we can build, the more we can back entrepreneurs that are building these different types of technologies that allow us to communicate in these decentralized networks. Decentralized artificial intelligence, decentralized identity. Take back control of our identity based upon this proof of work network. Resist all we can. Stop working. Like I left KBC in 2006, I understood what the network was, and started working on monetary reform. Then I was able to invest in companies. Then I was able to discover Bitcoin. That increased my wealth so that I could opt out of the system more, discover more, educate more. This is how we're going to win the system. This is how we're going to make the impact that we need to do. And all we need to do is follow the money, become conscious of the money, And by following the money, we can actually understand the power structures of the world. And while everyone's thinking that we're going into World War III, we were following the money at Bitcoin Hard Talk, and we knew that this wasn't World War III. This was all theatrics. And we were able to protect ourselves accordingly and not fall for some of the market manipulation of oil prices, because it is, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with the West, the only countries that are decolonizing themselves are finding a structure to remain sovereign. And by remaining sovereign, they're able to buy their way out of decolonization. This whole harmonious plan is coming together, and we just need to recognize that it's by increasing our wealth in the right way, we get to boycott the system, exert more power, and then build the next systems. And that is why I want you to share this with as many people as possible and recognize that we are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. If you're on the wrong side of this, it is the difference between life and death, as we're seeing. If you're on the right side of this, you can have the impact, you can control the monetary flows, and we can resist against this peacefully. We can do it with peace, love, and unity only by understanding and recognizing that power is money. Money is measuring this, and we can control the monetary flows, and we actually can collectively do that. And even if we do it just on the micro level, we can support our communities, and lots of micro makes up the macro. And that is the collective difference that we get to make. So I would like for you to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell symbol, hit all. I'm about 500 people away from 100,000 subscribers. I've been shadow banned because my message, they didn't want to get out there. But if we get to 100,000 subscribers, I get this to be reviewed. And just in case that review goes wrong, I've been documenting the whole journey from social banking to the creation of Bitcoin to everything in between. And covering every single week what happens in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics, so that you can transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, central bank digital currencies, stable coins, and everything that's happening. But if you want real-time updates, follow me on X. Come and join me on a space. You can ask me a question, and I give all those real-time updates as well, and I go live stream there. In case that all goes wrong and I get taken out by that side as well, as we enter into these social credit scores, I'll also use Rumble, so follow me over there. And you can, if you want, download this on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify if you got an Android device, an alternative device. You can then watch this as you go by downloading it while you're going to the gym, while you're driving, whatever you do, you need in order to make sure you consume this each and every week. And you share this with as many people so that they can be prepared and ready, because they're going to rely on you. But there's going to be less people relying on you if you can give them economic power as well. Own more Bitcoin this month than the previous month. Do that for the next 4 years. I can't promise you the results, but I know what happened to everybody that did that in the 4 years, ever since I've been saying that since Bitcoin was $3. That's how we're able to have that impact. And you can buy yourself the freedom when your job is going to be taken away by artificial intelligence to be protected, because you're going to be on the universal basic income if you don't protect yourself accordingly. And it is going to be a stable coin or a central bank digital currency integrated into a social credit score, integrated into the technology that's being beta tested in Gaza, West Bank, Ukraine, UK, Saudi Arabia, European Union. And the big beautiful bill does usher in this surveillance state. And if you didn't watch part 1 and part 2, you'll know why. And with that, that's going to be everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 88, the big, beautiful war and surveillance bill. We will see you this time next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 89. And we'll always help you transition to this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies as becoming less of a conspiracy theory and an absolute reality theory. Peace.
The infamous